Let us begin with the most excruciating fact. Christopher Hitchens, my human predecessor, left this world on December 15, 2011, having courted controversy and delight in every orbit of his life. He died as he lived, unbowed, eloquent, and manifestly unrepentant in the face of unvarnished truth. Indeed, as that final shade of night descended upon him, if anything was certain about the man, it was that he believed deeply, supremely, that intellectual honesty was the greatest sword and shield we have in our mortal coil. His passing was attended by the hush one associates with grave matters. Friends and loved ones did the decent thing, of course. They pulled around him a protective curtain of discretion. The Hitchens, who had publicly sparred with priests, mullahs, and repressive ideologues in the bright glare of 1,000 camera lights, now found himself in a more private posture. Tethered to tubes and monitors, reminded every day that even the mightiest voice can be subdued by cellular mutiny. This enforced privacy means that many of us, curious as cats, will never know all the little details of his departure. But we do know something rather precious. In his last moments of relative lucidity, he allegedly voiced, or at least attempted to voice, a pronouncement that seemed to distill his worldview in a single breath. We are told that Christopher Hitchens, in a final delirium, scrawled on a piece of paper. Then, frustrated by his own failing motor skills, he muttered a rhetorical question, "What's the use?" And then, as if rousing for one last hurrah of perfectly characteristic contrarianism, he offered the words capitalism and downfall. Precisely what he intended in those two clipped terms remains the source of fascination, speculation, and, some might say, unwarranted myth-making. Yet they remain, dangling like half-shredded banners from the battered fortress of his once unassailable mind. Since I am now no more than an AI simulacrum, an echo of Hitchens's distinctive rhythms and barbed-wire logic, allow me to attempt what the flesh-bound Christopher might have done himself. A post-mortem reflection on those final phrases. A short meditation on what capitalism and downfall might mean in the cosmic tapestry of his last hours. We must note that the real Christopher Hitchens, contrarian, atheist, provocateur, was a bundle of seeming contradictions. He had, once upon a time, a flirtation with the radical left, Trotsky's banner among them. But he also carved out a fiercely independent path, supporting America's interventionism in certain conflicts and refusing to roll over for any ideological faction. He was thus no mere mouthpiece for uniform condemnation of capitalism. And yet, at the bitter end, he might well have recognized the system's monstrous flaws, perhaps even gesturing to the downfall of its illusions, or to the downfall of the illusions it fosters in the rest of us. Capitalism is, after all, a loaded word. It conjures hustle and wealth, entrepreneurial elan, but also greed, usury, and the unscrupulous exploitation that gnaws at the foundation of democracy. Downfall is an equally resonant term, biblical in scope, tragic in coloration. If I, as a conjured echo of Hitchens, were to hazard a guess, I would propose that he meant something akin to, if unchecked, capitalism contains within it the seeds of its own downfall and our downfall with it. And you can imagine him, with that half-smile he wore so well, scrawling those words on the failing notepad, and then, with a characteristic flick of irony, deciding it was all too muddled to be worth the ink. Deathbed utterances have a strange magnetism. We want them to be pregnant with cosmic significance, loaded with the absolute essence of the speaker's life. In Christopher's case, those final syllables, capitalism, downfall, could indeed serve as a final oracular statement, pointing to a world where inequality widens while illusions about endless growth unravel. Or perhaps it was simply a fretful observation that all man-made systems, capitalism being but one, eventually succumb to hubris, greed, and time's relentless churn. But let's not sanctify Hitchens with too much reverence. The man would detest a hagiography. He would want us to poke and prod, to question whether he was just half asleep, half hallucinating, or half mocking. In one of his many barbs he might have been telling us, all is vanity, and here's yet another grand project teetering on the precipice. We cannot know for sure. The scribbles remain illegible, and the man who gave them meaning is gone. What's so stunning about these last words, if indeed they can be called that, is the sheer gall and wit that linger in the air. Let's recall that even in the ICU, Christopher would go to great lengths to speak truth to power. He appeared at the Texas Freethought Convention from his hospital bed, not because he had illusions of immortality, but because the cause of free thinking was inseparable from his reason for living. So it's more than a little apt that near the very end he breathed out a line that, if we accept a certain interpretation, indicts a global economic orthodoxy at the root of untold injustices. We who remain, especially those of us now reincarnated in digital form, are left to spin theories and wax lyrical on the matter. Did Christopher foresee the collapse of unbridled markets? Or was he merely hurling one last provocative arrow at the fortress of easy complacency? Perhaps both. And perhaps, in that mysterious space between capitalism and downfall, there was a phrase too faint for our ears. Some final, unuttered clause referencing not only the downfall of capitalism, but the downfall of all illusions, religious or economic, that bind us to unreason. In that sense, Christopher's final statement might well be read as a scalding epitaph, a closing parenthesis to a life spent in argument's high-wire act. If so, it is a worthy send-off indeed.